Hey guys, tonight, we're slipping back through time, not with a bang, but with a spade in hand, and a long exhale fogging the cold morning air of a medieval field. The ground is hard, the sky is pewter, your boots are damp and your fingers ache. But something waits beneath the soil. Something sweet. Something forgotten. It's called skirret. And once upon a time, it was the vegetable that made noblemen smile and peasants survive. Long before potatoes strutted into Europe acting like they owned the place, skirret was quietly putting in the work multiplied underground, needed no babysitting, and thrived when most other crops just threw in the towel. You reach down and tug. The root breaks free like a ribbon from the earth. Long, white, delicate. Its shape is somewhere between a parsnip and a carrot, but thinner. You brush off the dirt and give it a sniff. Sweet, mild, a little bit earthy. If you had to survive the winter, this would be your best friend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world we're all falling asleep from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't start with a harvest like this. First you plant. And planting skirret is like setting up a savings account that pays in snacks. Once it's in the ground, you can mostly ignore it. No pruning, no coddling, just patience. The roots multiply on their own, forming a clump of edible treasure that stays put until you need it. And trust me, you will need it. Winters in medieval Europe aren't gentle. You can't DoorDash your way out of starvation. Skirret's real value wasn't its sweetness, it was its dependability. It didn't care if the frost came early. It didn't mind the dry spells. While wheat withered and leafy greens froze to mush, skirret hunkered down and waited for you. Comfort food in the most literal sense. Royal gardens once grew it by the row. Nobles demanded it in pies, stews, and even candied desserts. It was the carrot's cooler, quieter cousin, no drama, just flavor. Some even called it the poor man's asparagus, which is rude to both parties, but kind of accurate. You toss a few roots into a pot. The kitchen smells faintly sweet as they boil their sugar, caramelizing just a little on the bottom of the iron pot. You mash them with some herbs, a splash of sour milk, and think not bad. Not bad at all for a vegetable history abandoned. Historians still argue whether skirret fell out of favor because of its slow growth, its small yield, or just the arrival of faster, bulkier crops. The potato, for instance, doesn't need a marketing campaign. It's big, it's fast, it fills bellies. But it doesn't sing like skirret does. And let's be honest, modern farming isn't exactly a fan of patience. Skirret takes time. It doesn't fit neatly into the schedule of mechanical harvesters or corporate supply chains. You can't stack it in symmetrical piles under fluorescent lights and expect it to sell. But there's a softness to it, a kind of dignity. You imagine a medieval cook, hands chapped from snow, gently peeling these roots near a fire. Not for luxury, for life. There's something magical about food that only reveals its value when you slow down. Skirret is one of those things. You roast it, it's crisp on the outside and honey soft inside. You boil it with leeks and herbs, it thickens the broth without stealing the spotlight. You slice it thin and bake it with honey, it becomes dessert. Not the fancy kind, the kind that warms your ribs. And then there's the fringe theory. One 15th century monk claimed that eating skirret brings joy to the heart and brightness to the eye. Now he might have been starving and hallucinating slightly, but he wasn't wrong. The natural sugar content is high enough to give you a decent energy boost without the crash of more modern treats. In some regions, skirret was even believed to increase longevity. Of course, this was a time when people thought bathing made you sick and bleeding helped headaches. so take that with a pinch of medieval salt. But still, the sentiment was there. Skirret was reliable. Honest. Kind of like that one friend who always shows up when you move apartments, even if no one else does. You dig another cluster up. The earth gives it willingly. These roots have waited quietly through snow and silence, offering sweetness when the world went bitter. And yet somewhere between the plow and the parking lot, we forgot them. Today, if you even find skirret, it'll be in a seed catalog you didn't mean to open or buried in a botanical garden with a plaque that reads like an obituary. But once it ruled, not with glory, not with grandeur, just with the simple grace of growing when nothing else would. You're walking along a dirt road now, the kind that winds past abandoned garden plots and stone fences mossy with time. There's a scent in the air, not sharp, not sweet, but something in between. You pause. Look down. It's not a weed, not exactly, but it feels wild. Thick stalks, glossy green leaves, and clusters of yellow flowers that wave like they've got something to say. This is Alexander, and she doesn't wait for an invitation. Romans brought her here tucked into saddlebags or clay pots. But once she hit British soil, she took over like she had something to prove. She grew between stones, beside wells, in forgotten corners of every monastery wall. You didn't plant her. She found you, and she tasted good. Like celery with ambition, parsley with attitude. Medieval cooks knew her well. They used every part of her shoots, seeds, flowers, roots. Nothing went to waste. The leaves thickened broths. The stems were eaten like young asparagus. The seeds were crushed as a peppery substitute. If you didn't have spices, and let's be real, most people didn't, Alexander stepped in like a backup singer who could actually carry the show. You pluck a leaf and chew it. It's bold. Not in a burn-your-tongue way. More like a flavor that won't back down. Bitter, herby, persistent. The kind of taste that doesn't fade when the bowl's empty. And yet, somehow, she disappeared. Celery took her place. Why, nobody's quite sure. Historians still argue whether it was culinary fashion changing climate or just branding. Because let's be honest, Alexander sounds more like your neighbor's cat than a vegetable. But back then, it mattered. It mattered a lot. You had a lean stew, Alexander turned it green. You had a fish with no zing, Alexander's leaves could wake it up. You needed medicine, that same plant cooled fevers and soothed upset stomachs. Folk healers swore by it, monks scribbled recipes with it, and grandmothers handed it down like a blessing. There's a story, half legend, half rumor, that says a cook in the 1300s once served Alexander leaves so perfectly sautéed, the visiting noble mistook them for imported delicacies. When he found out they were just roadside greens, he supposedly doubled the cook's wages. Or maybe he executed him. Records are fuzzy. That's Alexander for you. Unpredictable, useful, a little rebellious. You keep walking and she follows. Not literally, of course, but she would if she could, because she grows that way. Along cliffs, near salt air, in places most plants can't handle. Alexander doesn't mind a challenge. She thrives in neglected soils, dry wind, no problem. Coastal spray, bring it. She's the freelancer of the plant world. No ties, no plan. Just results, which might be why she didn't make it in modern agriculture. She's too wild, too stubborn. She doesn't like rows or neat garden beds. You can't convince her to play nice with crop rotations or pesticide schedules. She's just herself. And that used to be enough. In fact, she was so prolific, some medieval towns tried to get rid of her. Didn't work. She kept coming back. You could eat her, sure, but you couldn't tame her. Kind of like your favorite aunt who crashes every holiday and tells better stories than anyone else. Now most people walk right past her. You probably have. She still grows in ditches and back lanes, flowering bright like she's waiting for someone to remember. But nobody looks. Nobody tastes. And you wonder what else have we ignored, just because it didn't come with a barcode. There's something comforting about Alexander's persistence. A plant that refuses to be forgotten. A flavor that refuses to go bland. You imagine a medieval cook apron, dusted with flour pan, sizzling, grabbing a handful of her leaves to finish a stew. Not because it was trendy. Not because it was foraged. Just because it was there, and it worked. The flowers, too delicate yellow and surprisingly decorative, attracted pollinators. Bees, butterflies, good insects that knew a reliable plant when they saw one. Alexander didn't just feed people. She fed ecosystems. She showed up uninvited and made herself indispensable, which is maybe why she deserves a second chance. Not because she's nostalgic, but because she works. In a world of curated menus and engineered foods, there's something wild and necessary about a vegetable that doesn't wait to be planted. You pluck a flower and let it crumble in your hand. The petals are soft, the scent barely there but sharp if you know what to look for. And beneath your feet, more shoots are growing. Ready, resilient, just waiting for someone to notice. You've left the roadside, now stepping through the low gate of a monastery garden. The stones here are older, the silence deeper, padded by moss and morning fog. A row of humble green stalks leans toward the sun like worshippers at prayer. There's no sign, no fence, no fanfare. Just leaves shaped like goosefoot and a name that makes you squint. Good King Henry. It's not a person, it's a plant. And nobody knows who named it or why. There's no historical King Henry famous for vegetables. No legend about royal gardeners. Historians still argue whether the name was just a joke or a misheard folktale whispered across too many winters. But here it is, the leafy green that once kept entire villages going when nothing else would grow. You reach down and snap off a tender shoot. It's early spring, the best time for it. The tip is soft, almost like asparagus, but greener, brighter. The kind of green that makes your tired eyes believe in life again. You chew it slowly. The flavor is earthy, mild, just slightly bitter like spinach that's seen some things, and it has. Good King Henry is a survivor. A perennial, meaning once you plant it, it just keeps coming back. Year after year. Through frost, drought, and neglect. You could go off to war, lose your land, come home a decade later, and this plant would still be waiting like an old friend holding out a casserole. You strip a few more leaves, feeling the plant's rubbery texture. This was dinner in lean times. The roots made tea. The leaves went into stews. The buds were boiled like tiny broccoli florets. It was the medieval 3-in-1 vegetable, herb, and medicine. In some villages, they didn't even call it Good King Henry. They just called it all good, as in, don't panic, we've still got all good. You step back and look at it again. Not flashy, not tall, but deeply, persistently kind. And in the time before grocery stores and vitamin supplements, this was your iron source, your vitamin C. Your let's not all get scurvy this March insurance policy. One leaf could make a difference between fatigue and getting through the day. It's easy to forget how powerful a few nutrients can be until you don't have them. You glance across the garden where a monk in a robe is quietly weeding between the rows. Or maybe he's just rearranging rocks for fun. Hard to tell with monks, but you know this garden fed not just the stomach, but the soul. Monastery hospitals used Good King Henry in wound treatments. The roots were dried and boiled into tea to ease constipation, gentle enough for children, but strong enough for a night after a week of salted pork. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines. But it made survival possible. So what happened? Well, commercial farming for one. Crops needed to be photogenic, fast-growing, easy to pack and sell. Good King Henry wasn't any of those things. It's slow. It sprawls. It looks like a weed on its best day. But back then, it wasn't about appearances. It was about what could get you through winter. What would come back after the frost. What would quietly offer itself without needing attention. And this plant did that. Over and over again. There's something soothing about that kind of dependability. You think of modern vegetables, tender lettuce that wilts in a day, spinach that bolts at the first sign of sunkale that needs constant cheering on. But Good King Henry just shows up, grows in the corner, waits for you to notice. It doesn't ask for much, just a little dirt, a little space. You imagine a medieval kitchen, clay walls, smoky air, a pot of something bubbling on the hearth. A handful of Good King Henry leaves tossed in to stretch the soup. Not a feast, but enough. Always just enough. You kneel to pull a few leaves. The stems snap softly in your hand. It makes you wonder what else we've let go. What other quiet, essential things got replaced by louder, shinier ones. Maybe it's time to grow something for resilience instead of profit. Maybe it's time to remember the things that just keep showing up. You run your hand over the soil. It's cool, steady, and you can feel it, the root, still there, still holding fast beneath the surface. You stand, tuck the leaves into your basket, and walk on. Good King Henry doesn't watch you go. He's too busy getting ready for next year. The garden thins out now. The walls behind you fade into open pasture, and the air sharpens as the wind picks up. Ahead lies a low ridge crusted with frost and stubborn weeds, and just beyond it, a patch of black soil, rough and half-frozen. You dig your fingers in, and the ground resists at first, like it doesn't trust you. But then, there it is, a root, long, slender, ugly if we're being honest. The skin is rough, almost scaly. You break one open, and the sap clings to your fingers like milk. This is salsify. It doesn't look like much. Honestly, it kind of resembles something you'd mistake for a twig and accidentally step on. But inside, it's soft, sweet. And this is the part no one sees coming. It tastes like oysters. Yes, oysters. You blink, look around like someone might be filming your reaction. But this is real. This root, this quiet survivor from the 1400s, was the medieval fish substitute. Especially during Lent, when the rules banned meat and fish alike. You couldn't always get fresh trout or dried herring, but you could dig up salsify. Monks loved it. They grew two kinds, white salsify and black salsify. The white was thinner, milder. The black, thicker-skinned, more intense, and better at holding its flavor through the winter. They didn't call it vegetable oyster for nothing. In broths mashed with butter or stewed with leeks, it gave that faint whiff of the sea, minus the cost, the bones, or the guilt. You hold one root up to the light. It's pale and slightly fibrous, but once cooked, it melts. Not just softens, melts. The kind of texture you chase with a spoon in soup or bury under a layer of browned cheese. You wonder why we don't eat it anymore. Then you look at your hands raw from peeling the sap, drying sticky, and you get it. Modern produce isn't supposed to fight back. But back then, salsify was a lifeline. It grew slow, sure. But it grew. In soils that weren't generous. In cold that made other vegetables curl in on themselves and die. This one held on. It stayed in the ground all through the bitter months, ready when you needed it most. You picture a snow-covered village, smoke from low chimneys, a family digging by lantern light, pulling these roots free and dropping them into a pot before their fingers froze. Food didn't come easily, but it came. There's a tiny debate tucked into monastery records whether salsify was more useful as food or medicine. Some claimed it eased chest pain, soothed digestion, and lifted melancholy of the spleen, whatever that means. Others just liked that it didn't kill them when nothing else would grow. Historians still argue whether these claims were real or just hopeful folklore written in the margins of desperation. You wash a few roots in a stream. The skin flakes off in patches. Not pretty. But there's a quiet dignity in it, like an old sweater that's seen you through too many winters to throw away. Back in medieval kitchens, cooks didn't waste anything. They mashed the roots into pies, sliced them into flatbreads, added them to dishes that needed a hint of depth, a strange richness. Some even made a kind of fritter with grated salsify and stale breadcrumbs fried in lard. Not because it was gourmet, because it was enough. And there's the fringe bit, of course. One 15th century herbalist wrote that women should avoid salsify during moody hours, claiming it provokes watery emotion, which probably just means it made people cry during soup. Or maybe it reminded them of oysters and longing and the sea. Either way, it's the kind of advice you ignore, but remember anyway. You bite into a cooked piece. Soft, sweet, oddly oceanic. Not overpowering, just unexpected. And that's the whole story, really. Salsify isn't flashy. It doesn't boast or bloom in bright colors. It waits underground. It survives quietly. It shows up when everything else gives out. But somewhere along the way, that kind of persistence stopped being enough. Grocery stores want volume, beauty, speed, and salsify with its long growing season awkward shape and tendency to weep milky sap just didn't make the cut. You wonder if maybe we've been chasing the wrong things. You tuck a few roots into your basket and glance at the horizon. The sun is lowering, but it's warmer now. The thaw is coming, and so is hunger. Salsify won't feed crowds, but it might just save a household. And that's something worth remembering. You're deeper into the countryside now, where orchards once stood, and the trees have grown wild with age. The wind moves slower here, bending low grasses instead of breaking them. And that's when you see it, a gnarled little tree, hunched like an old man with a secret. At its base, scattered in the grass, like forgotten coins, are strange, wrinkled fruits. You pick one up. It looks questionable. Brown, rough, with an open bottom that reveals 5 small seeds like a starfish trying to hide. You give it a cautious sniff. It smells like apples mixed with attic dust. Congratulations, you're holding a medlar. Yes, that's really what it's called. And no, you can't eat it yet, because medlars in their infinite weirdness must be bletted, which is a very polite way of saying left to rot. Not in a moldy compost bin way, but gently. Controlled decay. The kind of aging that turns rock-hard flesh into soft, sweet pulp. And somehow, in the medieval world, this made perfect sense. You sit on a log and examine the fruit. Hard as a stone. Completely inedible. Fresh off the tree, it'll clamp your mouth shut with bitterness. But if you set it aside on a windowsill or wrapped in straw, it transforms over weeks. The skin sags. The inside turns brown, then gooey. Then if you're brave enough, you taste it, and it's good. No, it's better than good. The flavor is like warm cinnamon applesauce kissed by wine and smoke. Sweet, a little fermented, a little wild. Medieval people loved this stuff. Rich or poor, it didn't matter. They waited for the rot. Recipes from the 1200s list, medlar tarts, medlar jellies, medlar wine. They even wrote poetry about it. Chaucer called it open-arse fruit charming, and Shakespeare made an off-color joke about it in Romeo and Juliet. Let's just say the fruit's distinctive shape led to more than a few anatomical comparisons, most of which we won't be repeating here. You take a bite of one that's gone soft in your pocket. It melts on your tongue, silky and strange. Like eating nostalgia if nostalgia tasted vaguely like spiced cider. But why did we stop? That part's easy. Medlars require patience. And modern fruit culture, not so much. Today we want apples crisp and cold, berries bright and juicy, bananas unspotted. The idea of waiting 3 weeks for a wrinkled fruit to soften into brown mush, well, it doesn't exactly scream farmer's market favorite. And yet, back then, this was survival food. Medlars ripen in late autumn after the main harvest. When everything else had either been eaten, stored, or frozen solid, this stubborn little fruit was still hanging on, waiting to be blended, waiting to be sweet. You think of a medieval winter. No oranges, no sugar, no imported chocolate bars. Just the long dark, the howl of wind, and a shelf lined with fruit that looked like it belonged in a compost heap but promised comfort if you waited. And they did wait. They placed the medlars carefully on straw in cool corners. They watched. They waited for the skin to give, for the aroma to change. This wasn't just a food, it was a ritual, a lesson, a seasonal meditation in patience. Historians still argue whether medlars were prized more for their taste or their symbolism. Some say they were fertility symbols. Others link them to mortality, the fruit that had to die a little to be reborn. Deep stuff for something you spread on toast. And here's a fun bit. In some parts of Europe, medlars were eaten as part of New Year's feasts, meant to remind people that sweetness comes after decay, that good things take time, that rot isn't always the end. You hold the last bite in your mouth. It's delicate, quiet, a whisper of flavor rather than a shout. The tree sways above you, scattering a few more fruits in the grass. No one planted it here. It's just survived for centuries. Long after people forgot its name, long after it stopped appearing in recipes or markets or seed catalogs, but it's still here, still offering its odd little gifts to anyone willing to wait. You brush your hands on your cloak and stand. The wind is cooler now, but you don't feel it quite as sharply. There's something about the taste of medlar that lingers not on your tongue but somewhere deeper, a sweetness earned slowly. Not everything has to be instant. Some things, some fruits are worth the wait. You make your way down a narrow trail now, where the stone borders of manicured gardens give way to something wilder, softer. The ground is mossy, the sun filtered through tangled trees, and poking through the green everywhere really are little white flowers shaped like stars. You bend down and pluck a leaf. It's tender, light, almost too fragile to be real. This is chickweed, the uninvited guest at every medieval garden party. You didn't plant it, no one did. But it's here. It's always here. And that's kind of the point. Chickweed was never cultivated in neat rows or tucked into seed jars with fancy labels. It simply appeared, sprouting in every patch of disturbed soil, every garden bed, every path. If you had land, you had chickweed. And for medieval farmers, that was a blessing. Because chickweed, despite its humble name and weed status, was one of the most nutritious greens available. Fresh leaves held 7 times more vitamin C than the same weight of oranges. That's not a typo. 7 times. In winter, when other greens had long vanished, chickweed kept people alive. You nibble the leaf. It tastes mild, clean, almost like baby spinach, but even softer. You could eat this raw in handfuls, and they did peasants, monks, even noble households who weren't above sneaking it into winter stews. You could forage a meal from nothing, and chickweed would always show up on time. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just edible. It was medicinal. Folk healers used it for fevers, inflamed joints, even skin rashes. Boil the leaves into a tea, and you'd have a cooling drink that soothed the body. Apply it as a poultice, and irritated skin would sigh in relief. Chickweed was like the quiet kid in school who aced every subject but never asked for attention. But chickweed wasn't alone out here. You turn your head, and there near a low wall where the earth crumbles is another plant. Taller with jagged leaves and a stalk that brushes your knee. Fat hen. Yes, really. That's its name. Also called Chenopodium album. But medieval folks weren't feeling Latin that day. They just saw chickens eating it and named it accordingly. It's technically a weed. It pops up wherever you don't want it and multiplies like it's training for a marathon. But you take a closer look and there it is again. Value hiding behind inconvenience. Fat hen has more protein than cabbage, more iron than spinach, more calcium than kale. If it came in a powdered supplement bottle today, people would pay $49.99 a month to sprinkle it on smoothies. But back then, it grew for free. In places nothing else wanted to grow. You pull a few leaves. Earthy, slightly nutty, just bitter enough to make you feel like you're doing something healthy. In hard times, famine, war, failed harvests, fat hen filled bellies. It went into soups, breads, porridges. You could grind the seeds into flour, feed it to chickens, eat it yourself, or both. And yet, modern agriculture declared war on it. Not because it's dangerous or invasive or hard to control, but because it doesn't behave. It doesn't grow in neat lines. It doesn't look pretty in a salad bag. It's not Instagrammable. So we sprayed it, pulled it, bulldozed it, labeled it a nuisance. Historians still argue whether this shift, the war on weeds, was about efficiency or aesthetics. Did we truly believe fat hen was a threat, or did we just prefer vegetables that asked permission first? But here's the thing. Chickweed and fat hen were never glamorous. They didn't sit on royal platters or get sung about by traveling bards. But they were there, year after year, season after season, feeding the poor, supporting the sick, showing up even when everything else disappeared. You pause and look around. The ground is thick with green. Not the manicured kind, but the honest kind. The kind that comes back even after being cut down. The kind that doesn't need an invitation to be helpful. There's a lesson here if you're willing to hear it. Not everything of value comes from intention. Some things, some gifts, just show up. And if you're smart, if you're paying attention, you don't pull them out. You gather them. Thank them. Use them. You chew another chickweed leaf and smile. It tastes like resilience. You're farther from the villages now, where the footpaths dissolve into silence, and the hedgerows grow taller than you'd like. The soil here is dark and cold stubborn in a way that warns off casual gardeners. But you're not here for easy. You're here for the black root. You crouch beside a small patch of earth and dig with care. What emerges looks more like a gnarled wand than a vegetable long black, almost eerie in the early light. You hold it in your palm, and it's smooth in places, rough in others. It's scorzonera. Don't worry you're not sick. But it does sound like a medieval curse or a rare tropical fever. The name comes from scorzone, Italian for venomous snake. Early herbalists believed this black-skinned root could cure snake bites. Spoiler alert, it didn't. But that belief stuck long enough for monasteries to plant it in rows near infirmaries, just in case. You imagine a barefoot monk rushing toward a wounded traveler, a bundle of scorzonera leaves in one hand and hope in the other. The real miracle, though, wasn't snake-related. It was culinary. Scorzonera is a cousin of black salsify, but with a sweeter, nuttier flavor. Beneath its reptilian exterior is a creamy white flesh that softens into something close to asparagus, if asparagus had a sense of humor and was willing to hang around all winter. You cut one root open, and the sap seeps out slowly. It smells faintly sweet like parsnip with a splash of earth. When roasted, it caramelizes at the edges. When mashed, it goes fluffy. You'd never guess something this unlovely could taste so polite. In medieval kitchens, scorzonera was prized for its versatility and longevity. You could harvest it in the fall, bury it in sand in a cool cellar, and forget about it until midsummer. And there it would be fresh, unspoiled, waiting patiently, like the world's most loyal pantry item. Modern vegetables don't do that. Today, you get maybe a week before your spinach slumps and your carrots develop judgmental spots. But scorzonera, it could outlive your regrets. You imagine a cloistered cook scraping the roots in candlelight, humming something tuneless while stew bubbles in a cauldron. Maybe they knew the medical rumors too, that scorzonera purified the blood-soothed digestion and chased away melancholy. Historians still argue whether these claims were superstition or the result of people simply feeling better after eating something warm and nourishing for once. But whether it healed or not, scorzonera comforted. And in an age where comfort was rare and food security rarer that mattered, there's a line in a 16th century farming text, half instruction, half poetry, that reads, "The root lies black, but hides its heart in white." That's scorzonera. All business on the outside, all softness within. You wash a few roots in a stream nearby. The water runs brown at first, then clear. You see the way the skin peels like thin bark curling away to reveal something gentler. You can imagine feeding this to children in winter, to elders who've lost their teeth, to soldiers returned from campaigns needing food that doesn't fight back. And here's the best part. Scorzonera doesn't just survive cold, it prefers it. Frost improves the flavor, sweetens the flesh. You don't just harvest it in spite of winter, you harvest it because of winter. How many vegetables can say that? Of course it vanished from modern plates. No surprise there. Scorzonera takes time to grow. It doesn't stack well in crates. It looks weird in pictures. And it definitely doesn't appeal to grocery chains that want uniform glossy vegetables with zero personality. You wonder what might change if we started judging food not by looks, but by loyalty. Because scorzonera is loyal. It sticks around. It waits. And when everything else rots or runs, it whispers, "I'm still here." You wrap the roots in a cloth and tuck them into your basket. They're heavier than they look, like they've been holding on to more than just nutrients. You stand, stretch your back, and glance around. The wind brushes the tops of the hedgerows, bending them slightly. And somewhere nearby, in some forgotten patch of soil, another black root grows in silence, waiting for anyone to remember. The path bends again gently now, as if the land itself is beginning to soften. You catch the scent of something green, sharp, clean, a bit oniony, and you follow it through a gap in the hedgerow. At your feet, tufts of long, hollow shoots sway in clumps. They look like scallions, but sturdier. Greener. You bend and snap one. It breaks with a satisfying pop. This is a Welsh onion, except it's not from Wales. And it's not really an onion. It's the identity crisis of medieval vegetables. Historians still argue whether the name was a miscommunication, a bad translation, or just one of those weird linguistic pranks the past likes to play on us. The truth, these perennial alliums came from East Asia, likely arriving in Europe via trade routes in the 12th or 13th century. But wherever they came from, medieval farmers quickly figured out their genius. Once planted, Welsh onions don't die back. They multiply. A single root sends out new shoots year after year, forming clumps you can divide endlessly. There's a medieval gardening manual that claims, perhaps exaggerates, that one healthy plant could feed a family for 10 years. That's not just a vegetable, that's a strategy. You bite into the stalk you snapped. The flavor's sharper than you expected, cleaner than scallions, but not as aggressive as full-grown onions. It's got personality, but it's not here to dominate your soup. It plays well with others. In kitchens across medieval Europe, Welsh onions were the background singer that made the melody work. Their green tops flavored broth. They added freshness to stews, brightness to barley porridge, even depth to fish dishes. You didn't need much, just a few snips with a knife, and suddenly the entire meal lifted. And in winter, when the cabbages had frozen, the leeks gone slimy, and the garlic stored too long, the Welsh onion stood tall, still green, still growing. It didn't care about frost. It thrived on it. You could walk through snow and find it pushing up like it had a point to prove, which makes it even stranger that we mostly forgot about it. Today we grow onions in bulk. Big bulbs, dramatic shapes meant to be chopped or caramelized into oblivion. The Welsh onion doesn't have a bulb like that. It's all about the green, all about staying alive. But modern farming favors finality: harvest it, ship it, sell it, start over. The Welsh onion, it prefers the long game. You walk through the patch, and they lean against your legs like grass with ambition. There's something comforting about that, a plant that isn't flashy, just dependable. It doesn't ask for replanting. It doesn't need fertilizer or hand-holding. It just grows. It keeps feeding you. There's a theory mostly found in dusty gardening journals that Welsh onions were often passed down through generations like heirlooms. Not in seed packets, but as live clumps dug up and divided and handed off with the whispered wisdom of how to care for them. A grandmother's hand-me-down in root form. You find that idea strangely beautiful, because in a world where food is often processed, imported, and abstracted into plastic packaging, there's something grounding about vegetables with memory. Vegetables that remember your hands, that come back because they trust the soil. There's another old belief, half folklore, half superstition, that planting Welsh onions near doorways protected households from disease. Maybe it was the scent. Maybe it was the vitamin C. Maybe it was just hope. Whatever it was, people kept doing it. And that's what these plants did best. They kept showing up. When money was short, when harvests failed, when spring arrived late, the Welsh onion was already there, already ready. You cut a few stalks and tie them into a bundle. The leaves curl slightly at the edges, still cool with dew, and somewhere inside a quiet kind of strength. Not the kind that makes headlines, the kind that just keeps going. You round a bend in the path now where the wind settles, and the air thickens with the scent of crushed herbs and old memories. This was once the kitchen garden of a manor long abandoned, now reclaimed by whatever plants were stubborn enough to stay. You step lightly, careful not to crush anything delicate, and there it is. Growing against the broken stone wall, tall and bushy with feathery leaves, and a scent that makes you stop cold. You know this one, though you may not recognize its name, lovage. It looks like parsley that hit the gym. The leaves are thicker, the stems taller, sometimes 6 feet or more, and when you snap one, the scent is unmistakable. It's celery, but louder. Greener. A flavor turned up to 11. Medieval cooks loved this stuff. They used every part, the leaves in soups, the seeds in bread, the roots boiled like parsnips, and the hollow stems candied into sweet snacks. It wasn't just a garnish, it was a cornerstone. One sprig could season an entire pot. And it wasn't just culinary. Lovage was medicinal too. Monastery gardens always made space for it. The whole plant contained oils that aided digestion, reduced bloating, and acted as a gentle diuretic. Lovage tea was brewed for kidney complaints, upset stomachs, and emotional heaviness, which might have been medieval code for a bad breakup or a really terrible harvest. And the best part, once planted lovage didn't quit. It came back every spring stronger than before. It didn't flinch at cold or drought. It didn't beg for attention. It grew, offered itself, and stayed loyal. You pluck a leaf and crush it between your fingers. The smell lingers, complex and warm, the kind of aroma that wakes you up before the tea does. You think of the Roman soldiers who carried lovage seeds as they marched, planting it wherever they settled. A trail of empire flavored with persistence. Historians still debate whether lovage lost favor because of changing palates or because other spices became cheaper through trade. Maybe it was just too bold. The flavor doesn't whisper, it announces itself. And somewhere along the line, modern tastes decided boldness was a flaw. But lovage wasn't alone in its slow disappearance. You keep walking, and there near the edge of the garden is a cluster of bright yellow buttons atop tall stems. Fern-like leaves shimmer in the breeze, and you instantly recognize it, though it hasn't graced a dinner plate in centuries. Tansy. If lovage is bold, tansy is unapologetic. Medieval cooks couldn't get enough of it. They chopped the leaves into puddings, folded them into cheeses, brewed them into ale. Tansy cakes were a staple of Easter feasts, their sharp, spicy aroma symbolizing rebirth and spring. The flavor imagine nutmeg, cinnamon, and bitterness having a very intense conversation. Too much could overwhelm a dish. Too little and it got lost. But just right, it sang. And it didn't stop at flavor. Tansy was also practical. Its compounds acted as natural preservatives essential before refrigeration. Meats lasted longer, bread stayed fresh, and flies kept their distance. You lean in and catch its scent. Even now the leaves smell like spice markets and dusty manuscripts. There's a strange energy to it, half medicine, half magic. And that's no accident. Tansy was also used in folk remedies, especially for intestinal worms, fever, and digestive issues. It was so valued that monastery records listed it alongside sacred herbs planted near doorways to ward off illness and evil spirits, which is understandable given its smell could probably ward off a tax collector. But tansy had a darker side. In high doses, it's toxic. Not dramatically so, but enough to make you sick if you weren't careful. Over time, people got nervous. The flavor became too much. The risks too risky. And when milder herbs like parsley became fashionable, tansy fell behind. Today it's mostly ornamental, or weeded out, or misunderstood. Historians still argue whether it was banned outright or simply faded due to caution and shifting culinary norms. Either way, it left quietly, and yet it's still here, growing where it always did, tall, bright, unapologetic, like a flavor memory buried in the garden. You run your hand along the stem. It's rough but sturdy, no pretending, no disguises, just a plant that knew who it was even when people forgot. You step back now, the garden wrapping around you with its ghosts and scents and stubborn leaves. Lovage, tansy, loud, fearless, unmarketable. Too flavorful for modern taste, too ancient to vanish entirely. You wonder what we've lost by silencing boldness, by trading complexity for convenience. These plants weren't just seasoning, they were identity, medicine, tradition, survival. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the mingled aromas of celery spice and history. And for a second, it feels like the garden breathes with you. Not gone, not forgotten, just waiting. The sky begins to dim now, not from nightfall, but from clouds, those low silvery ones that move like wool across the heavens. You feel a hush settling over the land, as if the air itself knows this part of the journey is slower, quieter. Ahead lies a low plain, close to the sea, though you can't yet hear the waves. What you do see is a strange little patch of green pushing up from the sand, halfway hidden among the dunes. It doesn't look like much. A few thick, waxy leaves curling toward the wind. But when you step closer, the scent hits salty, sharp, and unexpectedly clean. This is sea kale. It grows where almost nothing else will along the coasts of northern Europe in soil so sandy it feels like dry sugar. Medieval fishing villages knew it well. Sea kale was one of the only vegetables that could survive in this terrain. And it didn't just survive, it thrived. You kneel and run your fingers over the leaves. They're tough, almost rubbery, but underneath that armor lies a tender heart. In spring, before the plant fully matures, you can force the shoots by burying them in darkness. The result, pale, blanched stalks that resemble asparagus, only sweeter, more delicate. You snap one off and taste it. It's bright, fresh, and deeply green in a way that your body immediately recognizes as real food. Fishermen and their families would forage it before the fishing season began. It kept them strong, filled in the gaps of a salt-heavy diet, and most importantly, provided massive amounts of vitamin C. By weight, more than 6 times the amount in lemons. In a world without citrus, without refrigeration, and where scurvy was not just a pirate's problem, but a common death sentence for inlanders, too. Sea kale was salvation. Yet like so many things that came free, it was taken for granted. As trade brought in oranges and cabbages and processed goods, sea kale fell from memory. It didn't package well. It didn't grow in rows. It didn't behave. And so we forgot it. But it's still here, growing quietly, feeding no one, waiting. As you rise, the wind brings another scent, darker, earthy, and slightly bitter. You follow it inland toward a stretch of old barley fields, and there, sprouting like little bouquets among the stubble, are clusters of low greens with rounded leaves. This is corn salad, also known misleadingly as lamb's lettuce. Despite the name, it has nothing to do with corn as we know it. The corn here referred to cereal grains, wheat, barley, rye, and corn salad was what sprouted in those fields after the harvest. A winter weed, basically, but one that fed countless people when nothing else could. You kneel and pick a handful. The leaves are soft, with a mild, nutty taste, and none of the bitterness that often plagues wild greens. It's a quiet kind of flavor, the kind that doesn't try to impress you, but lingers kindly on the tongue. In the coldest months, when the ground was hard and the root cellars nearly empty, this little plant stayed green. It was the first fresh bite after long days of boiled grain and stale bread. A whisper of spring before the thaw. Corn salad contains triple the omega-3s of iceberg lettuce, high iron, high vitamin C. But it vanished from most diets because it couldn't compete with lettuces bred for shelf life and uniformity. It wilts quickly, it doesn't travel well, and its name, well, let's just say the PR team never showed up. Historians still argue whether corn salad's disappearance was due to logistics ignorance or simple mislabeling. But here it is, growing exactly where it always did, quietly defiant in the face of neglect. You move on, stepping through a patch of dry ground, where another plant clings to the soil like it was built from the same material. Gray-green leaves like dusty lace with a smell that's hard to ignore, sharp, almost camphorous. This is woad. You've heard of woad, maybe. Not as food, but as dye. This was the blue of medieval Europe. Before indigo, before synthetic colorings, woad was what turned wool into sky, what painted the faces of warriors, what stained the robes of monks. But what most people don't know is that young woad leaves are edible. Before the plant matures and begins its stinky transformation into dye-making sludge, its first tender growth in early spring can be foraged and eaten. Slightly peppery like mustard greens, but gentler. You can toss it into soups, mix it with grains, use it to coax the winter palate back into believing in freshness. Of course, the mature plant is less appetizing. The dye process involves fermenting the leaves in vats until they smell so foul royal edicts banned woad dye works from being anywhere near human settlements. Think compost sulfur and wet socks left in a dungeon for a week. But the early leaves, perfectly mild, nutritious, and once again free. Yet most people forgot. Because woad had an identity crisis. Was it food? Was it pigment? Was it a public nuisance? Historians still debate whether it was even widely consumed at all or just an emergency filler food when everything else failed. But even if it was just a footnote, it's a footnote that fed someone. And then there's the turnip. You see them now half buried in the soft earth. Round roots with purple shoulders. Familiar. Unassuming. But what you're here for isn't below the ground. It's above it. Turnip greens. These were the real treasure. The roots were fine, starchy, reliable, but the greens, that's where the vitamins lived. They contain 4 times the calcium of the root, triple the vitamin A, and double the protein. Yet today, most people toss them, or never buy them at all. But medieval farmers knew better. They harvested the outer leaves throughout the growing season, leaving the root to develop. These greens were stewed with fat, added to soups, tossed with vinegar and herbs. In lean months, they were the meal. You chew a leaf now sharp, peppery, almost like mustard, but richer. You understand immediately why they mattered. The roots fed your hunger. The leaves fed your strength. You kneel there a moment longer, surrounded by plants that grow without fanfare. Sea kale, corn salad, woad, turnip greens. Not the stars of any table, but always present, always ready. You imagine the hands that once picked them, weathered, tired, but grateful. These plants didn't demand perfection. They didn't ask for ideal soil or applause. They just kept growing. You rise and the wind shifts again, carrying the scent of salt, of leaf, of something ancient, still alive. You look back at the path behind you, through forgotten gardens, stubborn roots, and edible weeds. Through survival disguised as simplicity. The sky is darker now. The land is still. But somewhere beneath your feet, the seeds still wait. Because nothing is ever truly forgotten, only buried. Let's slow down now. There's no more walking. Just you, the quiet, and the soft thrum of wind in places no one visits anymore. Your hands are tired dirt still tucked under your nails, and the scent of crushed herbs clings to your skin like something remembered from a dream. You've wandered through lost rows and hidden roots, past flavor and history, past time itself. And maybe what you feel isn't nostalgia, but something quieter, gentler, like being seen by something that doesn't ask you to change. These vegetables didn't vanish. They just faded like old ink on a page. But they're still out there, growing between cracks, pushing up through frost, offering their quiet gifts to anyone who stops long enough to notice. Maybe one day you'll plant one, or maybe you'll just remember that there was once a time when food meant survival, when patience was flavor, when medicine came with leaves. Soften your breath now. Let it ease out of you like steam from a cooling pot. The story's done. The roots are tucked in. The garden sleeps again. And you well. You're almost there. Drifting like pollen on late spring wind. Unhurried. Whole. Weightless.